And now...
What is this?
I know you're gonna dig this.
This is the Flatland Sports Podcast.
Where do you come from? Lubbock, Texas?
Lubbock, Texas.
A place called Lubbock.
I wonder if they think I'm so gorgeous back in Lubbock.
What do you care about Lubbock? You're big time now.
I'm just a little homesick, that's all.
Is that what you want, Larry, to spend the night in Lubbock, Texas at a day's end with a $15 voucher from Cinnabon?
Lubbock? No, it's near Lubbock.
What's it like there?
It's flat. Real flat. You stand on a coffee can, you can see Colorado.
Happy Friday from across the Great Plains of West Texas. This is the Flatland Sports Podcast, free and available worldwide on YouTube and Spotify. I'm here today. You can tell the voice is not great. It's not 100%, but I'm ready to put in 100% effort. I did recently get confirmation that the People's Republic of College Station is not censoring the Flatland Sports Podcast from Aggie State Internet at the moment. I had a report from an anonymous but reliable source that they saw someone watching the show on the campus bus. So as of right now, Aggie State Internet has not fully blocked me. Take advantage while you can. It's coming. There's too much Aggie slander that's going to spew from these airwaves. So if you're watching, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. On the show today, we'll be previewing the Oregon State Beavers as they come to Lubbock for the final non-conference round of the year. We'll take a look around the Big 12 and also one thought, one take. All that and more. But first, Red Raiders in action. Texas Tech Soccer returns to Lubbock to take on the Utah State Aggies this Sunday at 1 o'clock p.m. Red Raiders are coming off of a 2-0 win over the New Mexico State Aggies last Thursday. This match will wrap up the non-conference play portion of the schedule for Texas Tech before they travel to Waco to take on the Baylor Bears Friday on September 19th. You can catch the action on ESPN Plus or listen live on 88.1 The Raider if you are in Lubbock. Now, Texas Tech football welcomes the Oregon State Beavers this Saturday at Jones AT&T Stadium. It will be a 2:30 kickoff on Fox. Red Raiders are 2-0, currently ranked number 21 at the moment. By the way, the first time since the 2014 season, Cliff Kingsbury's first season, that Texas Tech has spent 3 consecutive weeks ranked in the top 25. So what do we need to know about the Oregon State Beavers? Well, first of all, they're really bad. They're feeling the effects of the Pac-12 collapse at this point. They used to be in the Pac-12. Well, actually, they're still in the Pac-12, but it's a much different Pac-12 than before, with only Oregon State and Washington State in the conference at this exact moment. USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington all left for the Big Ten. Just, good Lord, was it really last year? The year before last, but it wasn't that long ago. Arizona State, Utah, Colorado to the Big 12. They're stuck somewhere between being independent and being a group of 5 in a 2-team conference. I believe, I'll have to double check this. I had seen that they're scheduled to play each other twice this year too. They both have a home and home. I'll double check that for y'all. But basically, we feel bad for the Oregon State fans. Texas Tech very nearly was in that same position. But I will say a cautionary tale about what happens if, one, your leadership becomes complacent, which is what happened to Oregon State, or 2, if your leadership is stupid, which is what happened to Washington State. And in the case of Washington State, it's ridiculous that they're in this position. They had the brand power. They had College Game Day. They had ratings because they were the main subject of Pac-12 After Dark. But then they just got caught up, and by they, I mean the leadership, the president, athletic director of Washington State got caught up in the Pac-12 snobbery side, and now they're broken homeless. Oregon State, they were not as snobby as Washington State was in the Pac-12. Their problem is that they became complacent. They believe that The Pac-12 had been around for 100 plus years. They'll be around for 100 plus more years. And, Texas and OU went over from the Big 12 to the SEC, but the Big 12 has been a shaky conference since the beginning. There's not as much history there. USC, UCLA, Oregon, they're going to be here forever. And didn't put in the investments to keep up with their facilities or to keep up with players, to make sure that they were at the top of everyone's minds when you were potentially looking around for another school to add to your conference, and as a result, they're stuck at where they are. Now, Oregon State and Washington State did get it together, and they kept the conference alive. In doing so, they've kept the money, I believe, from the NCAA basketball tournament that was owed to them, as well as some college football playoff credits, if I'm not mistaken. The Pac-12, starting next season, will be adding Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, San Diego State, and Texas State, as well as Gonzaga in basketball only. Perfect candidate for the All-State 12 conference that was floated around that for the Big 12 that Brett Yormark had sold the naming rights to the Big 12 to All-State, and it was going to be the All-State 12. If the Big 12 doesn't take that, then the Pac-12, by all means, with every single school being a state institution, it's just too perfect. But all in all, they stay alive. There's certainly nowhere, and by they I mean Oregon State, certainly nowhere near what they were before. For Oregon State, that means they're a shell of what they once were. The last year of the Pac-12, Oregon State was near the top. They were really starting to put it together and really were in a position to start competing for Pac-12 championships and possibly college football playoff berths. And now, with the Pac-12's collapse, they're struggling to fill the roster with quality players. Last season, Texas Tech lost to Washington State in Pullman. Washington State, at that time, 1 year removed from the death of the Pac-12, still had mostly a Power 5 roster, still had fans that were supportive, still were in it, still were engaged. Like I said, Washington State didn't have a player problem, didn't really have a brand problem or a fan problem. They just had a elitist problem, and that left them homeless. Oregon State, though, and Washington State now too, but we're focused on the Beavers. Oregon State, now basically a G5 team with a G5 roster and a G5 league. And not a very good one, as Oregon State comes to Lubbock 0-2. They had losses to Fresno State in week 0 and Cal in week 1. And the same Fresno State, by the way, got blown out by Kansas in week 2, or excuse me, in week 0. Okay, let me correct myself. Fresno State week 1, Cal week 2, and Fresno State got blown out by Kansas in week 0. I'm getting through it. I'm getting through it. The throat, man. So key players: Oregon State, Malik Murphy is the quarterback for the Beavers, the former Texas Longhorn quarterback. If you recognize the name, he is 52 for 81. 52 of 81 passes, 615 yards. He's got 4 touchdowns. And here's the kicker: 3 interceptions on the season. Anthony Hankerson's the leading receiver for the Beavers, 178 yards, 40 carries, 0 touchdowns. And this is kind of the trend for the Beavers as you look through their roster and through their roster stats. They struggle to get it into the end zone, and they struggle not to turn the ball over. And wide receiver Trent Walker, 235 yards, 16 catches, no touchdowns. Biggest issue for Oregon State, truly, though, is that their offensive line and defensive line are a liability. As we talked about before, when you're struggling to get roster spots, struggling to fill a roster, struggling to get quality players, the offensive line and defensive line are the first to suffer. If you look back, we'll use Texas Tech as an example. In the past, the years that Texas Tech, before they started really stepping up the NIL game, you could compete with Texas for a wide receiver. You could compete and get a guy like Patrick Mahomes. You could compete and get a guy like Michael Crabtree, who had offers from Texas. You could compete for players in positions like quarterback, wide receiver, running back, where you couldn't compete because the money just ran out was in positions like the offensive line, defensive back. If there was ever, for whatever reason, a special teams, a kicker who guaranteed a 80-yard kick somehow, you were out of money to try to get a player like that. And so Oregon State, now being out of the Pac-12 or out of major college football, essentially, their roster took the biggest hit in the offensive line and defensive line, and really in the defense as a whole. Defensive line especially looked bad. So far, they've allowed 36 points from Fresno State, 34 points from Cal, ranked 120th in scoring defense. Not great. For Texas Tech, Baron Morton is a player to look at. I want to see how he continues to progress. He looked great last week after the injury in week 1. Last week he played one half, was 18 for 26, 258 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'd really like to see 3 quarters out of Morton tomorrow, just to really see him get closer to put a complete game in before we get to Utah in week 4. Skylar Gill Howard, that is another guy, another key player for Texas Tech. He's just been a fun guy to watch. Had, of course, the thick 6, as Mike Golick Jr. proclaimed last week against Kent State. Watching him play, he's one of those guys that you can see just watching him through the TV screen, watching him live. He loves the game. He loves Texas Tech as much as we, the fans, do. Just an absolute great player that is broken out already in the year 2025. AJ Holmes, another guy to look out for, led the team in solo tackles last week with 4. He also had 1 sack, 1 tackle for a loss, and forced a fumble. I think he forced the other fumble too. They just weren't able to pick it up. They tried to scoop it instead of fall on it. Texas Tech's defensive line is the real deal. Now, you did take an injury this week, and we'll get to that later. Another player to look at, Adam Hill, absolutely shined last week. He was Texas Tech's leading rusher with 16 carries, 126 yards. Cam Dickey, another player I really want to take a look at, player that I want to watch closely this week. Not very productive from a yardage standpoint, but he scored 2 touchdowns, was used quite a bit in short yardage situations, and was very successful. Also, a lot better in the pass protection game, which is what Texas Tech struggled with in week 1. Curious to see what his role will be with Jacoby Williams playing as well. Terrence Carter Jr., another player I've circled. He had 1 catch for 50 yards last week, but man, what a 50 yards that was. I'll put a link to the highlight in the description. Go watch that one play. I mean, we're going to see, I really want to see some more from him, and I'm really excited to see what he's going to give us over the course of his career. We'll go now to the keys of the game. So you really went from, over the course of this season, you went from a really bad FCS team to a really bad Group of 5 team, and now you're playing a really bad semi-former Power 5 team. It's another game on the schedule that you should win without much struggle. We're basically back for the first time in what was kind of a typical Mike Leach era non-conference slate, where it was just cupcake after cupcake after cupcake, and you're building up confidence and building up stats. And as I've said in my other shows, I have absolutely no issues with that. We're talking about, we want Bama. We want to see better games in the non-conference. Sure, I want to see winning seasons. I could really care less how you do in the non-conference as long as you're winning games. And I'm not a huge fan of playing a tough road game in week 1 just to get punched in the mouth when you could have. There's no preseason in college football. you need some games to just kind of get the team to gel a little bit before you start playing real games. I'm not saying I'm against playing tough games in the non-conference, but it's a nice change of pace the way the last couple seasons have gone. Keys to the game, though. Another game. We're week 3. We'll have real keys of the game next week. This one, it's more what do I want to see? And what I want to see is Baron Morton play 3 quarters. I want to see him out longer. I want to see how he handles the strain, and just really to get him prepared for Utah in when we start Big 12 play. I want to continue to see offensive line and defensive line domination. I want to see on the defense sacks, tackles for a loss, no running lanes opened up. And on the offense, I want to see the opposite. No sacks, no tackles for the loss. And I want to see the offensive line just have their way with the Oregon State defensive line and open up running lanes. And then the other thing, really the only negative about last week is I want to see Texas Tech be better at taking advantage of opposing teams' mistakes. Malik Murphy in 2 games has thrown 3 interceptions. The special teams for Oregon State has looked atrocious. They had a really bad botched punt that was returned for a touchdown versus Fresno State. And I mean, like comically, like NFL blooper reel bad. Texas Tech, Oregon State, my Lord. Oregon State opted to go for 4th down most of the game last week because the punting unit was so bad that they couldn't rely on the punters actually getting the ball off. Last week, Texas Tech forced a couple fumbles that were not recovered. Guys were trying to scoop the ball instead of just falling on it. So I want to see Texas Tech play clean against a team that has just really struggled with ball control. Like you could really blow the turnover margin by a mile if you handle your business in this game. Overall, this is the final non-conference game in the slate that has been underwhelming from a competition standpoint, but I'll tell you, great for player and team development. This is another game that shouldn't be much of a contest. Oregon State will be a little bit better than Kent State. We might see a point at the end of the game where Texas Tech has the 3rd and 4th stringers out, and Oregon State still has the first team, and we find out the first team for Oregon State is actually better than the 4th team from Texas Tech, and that's fine. You're still dealing with you're dealing with a more traditional group of 5 roster as opposed to what Kent State had, where you've got players on the team that at least had or have NFL aspirations, have hopes that someday they can transfer to another school and make a run for the college football playoff. They've got a former Longhorn playing quarterback for them. So the team is not good, but the quality of player is still going to be a little bit better than what you've seen before. Overall, though, it has been complete domination from Texas Tech so far. So I'm going to take Texas Tech is the 23.5 point favorite. Good teams win, but great teams cover, and I think Texas Tech will cover the spread again. I'm going with 52-14 Red Raiders. So now let's go ahead and take a look around the Big 12. We'll start with tonight, Colorado and Houston. Colorado at Houston. That game is 6:30 on ESPN. Houston, a 4-point favorite. Colorado, I just don't think is going to be really good this year. They're 1-1 right now. Blew a close game against, I can't remember who they played in week 1. That sick brain fog is getting me. But they just didn't look good. They looked really out of sorts. Houston, I think, is looking a lot better this year. So I'm taking Houston 24-17. Up next, also tonight, Kansas State, Arizona, 8 p.m. kickoff on Fox. Kansas State has been terrible, absolutely terrible. They're 1-2 this year. They lost to Iowa State, and they had to come back to win against North Dakota, and then they lost again last week to a team with a pulse. Arizona State actually looking surprisingly better after having a really rough year last year. Kansas State is a 1.5 point favorite. If Kansas State is turning the ship around, and we've seen Kansas State turn plenty of ships around in the past, they're going to have to do it in this game. If they can't get this game, then it's going to be really hard for them to come back. And you can definitely kiss the college football playoff goodbye for the Wildcats if they lose. And I think they will. I'm going to go ahead and take Arizona 21-14. Tomorrow's slate of games, it starts with Samford and Baylor. Baylor finally getting a cupcake game. They kind of went through the grinder with Auburn on the schedule and SMU. They're 1-1. They just barely took a loss to Auburn for the season opener. Baylor, a 47.5 point favorite. I'm going to pick the Bears to cover. That's going to be 61-6 in favor of the Baylor Bears. Moving on now, Northwestern State at Cincinnati. Just another cupcake game. Cincinnati, I'm going to say it every week until Cincinnati changes my mind. But they're going to be firing Scott Satterfield by the end of this year. But we're also dealing with Northwestern State here. Cincinnati is going to win this game. I'm going to say 34-12. And that game, by the way, 2:30 on ESPN Plus. Another game, 2:30 on ESPN. The Backyard Brawl. West Virginia at Pittsburgh, one of the most petty rivalries in sports, and I'm here for it. Pittsburgh, a 7.5 point favorite. West Virginia, I thought actually looked pretty good, surprisingly good at the start of the season. They're 1-1 now. Pittsburgh 2-0. Rich Rod had the guys ready to play, and I thought there'd be a little bit more of a transition period. I thought it might be a disaster this year, and it is a disaster, but not for the reason I thought. West Virginia has just taken, from an injury standpoint, hits that they can't come back from. And so Pitt, a 7.5 point favorite. And as much as I want West Virginia to pull off this upset, I'm going to go ahead and take Pitt 17-14. Up next, Iowa State versus Arkansas State. It is a group of 5 road trip for the Cyclones, who are ranked number 14. That game is 3 p.m. on ESPN2. Iowa State, a 21.5 point favorite. Iowa State is one of my favorites to win the Big 12 this year, aside from Texas Tech. And they're going to blow out Arkansas State. It's going to be 57-7. Up next, Utah, ranked number 20. They entered the AP poll this week. That game is 7 p.m. on CBS Sports. They'll be traveling to Wyoming. Utah, a 23.5 point favorite. Watch out, though. You're on the road against Wyoming after dark. Utah, I would expect to be a little bit more used to the altitude than Texas Tech was when Tech went there and got smacked in 2022. I would tell you there's a strong possibility that Wyoming pulls off an upset here. It depends on what Utah really is. They blew out UCLA, but UCLA is not great. And Utah, much like Texas Tech, has not proven anything on the field. This will be a game worth watching if you have CBS Sports. But I am going to pick Utah to win. The spread is 23.5 in favor of Utah. I'm going to say Utah 28, Wyoming 23. Up next, 7 p.m. on ESPN Plus, Abilene Christian at TCU. There's another game that gives me all kinds of PTSD. TCU, a 37.5 point favorite. They're another team that looked really, really good against North Carolina. They actually had their bye week last week. And I believe TCU is going to be really good this year. I also believe that North Carolina is going to be really bad for the entirety of the Bill Belichick era. So TCU is a team that I just don't know about. Abilene Christian, as we know, they're a better team than you would expect from that level. TCU, 37.5 point favorite. I'm going to pick TCU to win 45-17. Up next, Texas State traveling to Arizona State. Texas State coming off of a big win against the UTSA Roadrunners. Arizona State 1-1. They just were so close to beating Mississippi State. Mississippi State, a kind of a middle to bottom SEC team. The Sun Devils just blew a coverage at the very end. They were so close to first of all, they got smacked in the first half. They came back to take the lead in the second half with a minute and a half to go and just blew a coverage and let Mississippi State take a touchdown to win. It's going to be a closer game than anyone thinks. It's a 9:30 p.m. kickoff on TNT. Arizona State, by the way, too, I thought they were going to be a lot more dominant, but it's clear that they have not found an answer for Cam Scadaboo in terms of how to replace Cam Scadaboo. Arizona State, a 17.5 point favorite over the Wildcats, and I'm going to say 21-17 Arizona State. I think this game will be a lot closer. Now, if Arizona State is what everyone thought they were going to be, this is about the time we're going to see them start moving things, turning things around for their program. But it's not looking good, and I just don't think Arizona State is going to be able to get anything going on the ground. But that is the look around Big 12. We'll review those picks next Monday. Let's go ahead and go to One Thought, One Take. I've been talking for years about how the AP poll is complete and total garbage and should in no way be anything more than a fun talking point. Instead, it's a mechanism that directly influences the college football postseason. This week was another prime example of why the AP poll should be abolished from college sports. It started on Sunday when the University of South Florida Bulls, took on the number 13 Florida Gators and pulled off a massive 18-16 upset on the road at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. USF deservingly shot up to number 18 in the polls while Florida fell off altogether. However, one particular voter felt differently as Haley Sawyer, who covers USC for the Southern California News Group, left USF unranked and moved Florida up from 14 to 16 despite their loss. If it wasn't enough to have clearly submitted a ballot without even bothering to check the scores, Sawyer decided to take to social media to defend herself by basically saying it doesn't matter because a lot of people vote, so it averages out, and the AP poll doesn't matter anyway. It's just a fun talking point. Both things completely incorrect, as 60 to 62 voters isn't what I would call a large sample size of the college football media landscape, especially when you consider those 60 to 62 voters are exclusively newspaper and news station media. Also, to say it doesn't matter shows a complete lack of understanding of what her job actually is. The AP poll has been the driving factor behind the college football postseason field and the national championship since 1936. From 1936 to 1998, the AP poll was the sole decider of the college football national championship and has had a major influence on both the BCS and the college football playoff ever since. And Sawyer didn't even have the worst ballot in the poll. Chad Bishop, who covers Georgia Tech for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, had Notre Dame move from unranked to number 8 after the Irish had a bye week. On top of that, last week he completely forgot Florida State existed in his week 2 ballot and just kind of snuck him back in there. It highlights a problem that has plagued college athletics for decades, and that is the people in charge of college football not only are unqualified or don't care about the sport, most of them don't even like it. In the case of the AP poll, most of the so-called journalists are people who accept their jobs not because they wanted to cover college football or because they like their specific team, but because the newspaper or station just happened to be hiring at that time. Large portion of them view their current jobs at their local newspaper or news station as an unpleasant stepping stone to something bigger and better, such as maybe a job at ESPN or CNN, maybe covering the White House, covering the National Football League. And that's just within the Associated Press. There's also media giants such as ESPN, Fox, that are currently holding the college football world hostage as the primary decision makers are more concerned with ratings and propping up conferences that they have had a vested interest in, such as ESPN with the SEC. Then there's the university leadership themselves, who are largely made up of university presidents who have no interest or no understanding of how college athletics works at all. Most of them viewing college football as something beneath them, a sport that takes away from the academic notoriety of their institution. For example, when the Pac-12 collapsed, the Cal Board of Regents held a meeting to discuss options. One regent suggested dropping from Division I all the way down to Division III, essentially dropping the football program altogether. Another suggested simply, let's join the Big Ten, despite having no invitation. One of them couldn't even remember who the Cal mascot was. And this is a school that produced Aaron Rodgers, Marshawn Lynch. They were on the stepping stone of a national championship not that long ago. Stanford is the same. They're struggling because their leadership has viewed football as something beneath them, and they had a Heisman and were knocking on the door of a national championship less than 10 years ago. It was the Utah president who shot down the TV deal offered by ESPN that would have saved the Pac-12 and killed the Big 12 because a professor, in the most George Costanza way possible, believed the offer was much too low. And it's athletic directors and presidents who have more important things on their plate than watching college football games who decided that a 2-loss Alabama team was more deserving of a college football playoff spot than an undefeated ACC champion Florida State. What happened? Well, before we talk about that, we have to talk about what makes college football so great. And in my opinion, it's a combination of the following. It's the rivalry games. The fact that games like Ohio State, Michigan, Kansas, Missouri, Texas Tech, and A&M once upon a time hold as much weight in the fans' eyes as a college football playoff berth or a major bowl game. I just watched the Dallas Cowboys take on the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that as a Cowboys fan I hate. And the loss, a win, it wouldn't hold any weight to how it would feel to beat Texas A&M back in the day. There's also the personal connections, the fact that unlike professional sports, which are all based in major metropolitan areas, college football lives all over the country in places like Lubbock, Texas, Ames, Iowa, Athens, Georgia. People have personal connections to their university either by growing up in these towns or near these towns as a fan, or a lot of them as students and alumni who actually attended and actually have a real connection with the university itself, as opposed to just kind of living in the same city as a professional franchise. And then there's the inclusiveness, the fact that everyone from Alabama to Ohio State to Texas Tech to UCF is all competing to win the same national championship as everyone else. This is what college basketball does a great job of promoting, which is the idea that your team, no matter how big, no matter how small, could one day just put it all together and go on a run and win it all. We spent a lot of time talking about how we missed the good old days of college football. When exactly was that? For me, the best days of college football ended around 2010. I think the last great era of college football was right around the end of the BCS. Here was the conference makeup. It was the AQ6 made up of the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, Big East, Pac-10, and SEC. The conferences were still regional. The Big 12 still included Texas, Texas A&M, Nebraska, Missouri. And we also had the mid-major conferences, Conference USA, the MAC, the Mountain West, Sun Belt, and the WAC. And the Mountain West especially was a force in the 2000s with teams like Utah, BYU, TCU, Boise State. Along with that, you still had the BCS, which, while it was very flawed, has been by far the most fair version of the college football national championship setup. So what went wrong? Well, cable TV entered the chat. It started in the late 80s when the College Football Association collapsed after Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA for the right to control their own TV rights. At that point, conferences started consolidating to boost TV value. The large number of independent teams at that time, such as Penn State and South Carolina, started jumping into conferences in order to cash in on the newly available TV dollars. Then conferences started to realign to try to increase that pot. The Big Eight absorbed 4 teams from the Southwest Conference in 1996, effectively killing a league that had existed since 1914, leaving multiple schools stranded. The ACC did the same with the Big East in the late 2000s. The Pac-10 attempted to take Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Colorado, eventually just settling on Colorado and Utah in order to cash in on what would have been a groundbreaking international TV network. The Big Ten took Maryland and Rutgers from the Big East and ACC, despite neither of those teams bringing anything from a competitive or historical standpoint, but just because they brought in millions of cable TV credits from New York City and Washington, D.C. In the last round of realignment, college football landscape has become nearly unrecognizable, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, the Pac-12 being completely dismantled by the Big 10 and the Big 12, all for TV revenue. The SEC and the Big 10 are showing no signs of stopping until they have completely monopolized the sport by pushing the remaining conferences from the competitive landscape and showing absolutely no regard for schools, communities, or non-revenue sports. So how do we save college athletics? Well, I'm glad you asked. First of all, you got to sign Cody Campbell's Save College Sports plan. Put it into law, vote it into Congress, tell your congressman this is what you want. I'll provide a link to his page in the description. But the basic gist of it is that you would invoke the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, which would allow the entire league, the entire of Division I or the entire Power 4, to pull its TV rights together and negotiate as a whole. Basically what the NFL did that made the league one of the most profitable in the world. The SEC has proposed something called the SCORE Act, which essentially gives big brands such as Texas and Ohio State the right to set the rules and limit how much their competitors could spend. Basically, Texas could, in theory, with that act, say schools in the SEC can spend $100 million a year, and schools in the Big 12 can spend $50 million a year, and that there's nothing to stop it. Fortunately, the SCORE Act, as of yesterday, never even made it to the floor. Passing the Save College Sports Act would make everyone significantly more money than one conference could generate, and it would completely take away the need to be moving from conference to conference in order to chase revenue. TV networks would also have the ability to broadcast any game in any league, wouldn't be limited to a specific conference. Something that I think Fox is starting to figure out with the Big Ten, that there's not a whole lot of great Big Ten games going on, and they're spending $100 million per school a year. With TV revenue not limited to specific conferences, we can now move on to phase 2, the realignment phase. So I would reorganize the Power 5 back into 7 equal conferences. In this scenario, the Group of 5 would also form its own subdivision. Conference makeup would be as follows. We'd have the Pac-10 with Washington, Oregon, Washington State, Oregon State, Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Arizona, and Arizona State. Next, we would have the Big 8 Conference, Colorado, Nebraska, BYU, Utah, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Kansas State, Missouri, and Iowa State. Then the Southwest Conference, Texas Tech, Arkansas, TCU, SMU, Texas, Texas A&M, Baylor, Houston, Texas State, and UTSA. I would love for Rice to be there. Rice clearly doesn't care about sports enough to be a part of major college football anymore. Sorry, Rice fans. The SEC, LSU, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, Auburn, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky. Then the Big Ten, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana, Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Purdue. The ACC, Virginia, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Maryland, Clemson, North Carolina State, Georgia Tech, Duke, Florida State, and Miami. And then we'll bring the Big East back. West Virginia, UConn, Syracuse, Pitt, Rutgers, Penn State, Cincinnati, Louisville, USF, and UCF. We'll move the teams back in the conference with geographic and historic ties. Now, we'll also alter the scheduling to be as follows. Basically, each team plays a 9-game round-robin conference schedule with three non-conference games. One against a rival, regional or otherwise. 2 games against teams who finished identically in the standings and alternating conferences. So if you're the University of Texas and you're a fan of the Longhorns and you're getting mad right now because how dare you have to play UTSA and Texas State every year? Well, your non-conference schedule would be as follows. You would have Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl during the Texas State Fair every year. And then based on last year's standings, you would have Oregon and Georgia coming to town. So you lose those cupcake FCS teams, you lose the non-conference games that we're used to now and replace them with much, much better competition. Therefore, you need teams like Texas State and UTSA on the schedule in the conference. As for the postseason, it'll be an 8-team playoff featuring all 7 conference champions plus the Group of 5 league champion. Seeding will be based on, wait for it, the Kelly Ford rankings, which should already be the standard for college football playoff seeding. This way, the AP poll, the university presidents, and TV executives will no longer have a say in the on-field results, would be the sole determining factor in college football playoffs. The regular season would be preserved with an emphasis on conference races. Regional rivalries would remain part of the regular season schedule on an annual basis. Long story short, everything we love about college football would be restored. You're welcome, America. We've done it. Now, one final thing before we get out. Texas Tech released the injury report for tomorrow's matchup against the Oregon State Beavers. Biggest surprise, Romello Height, who was listed as questionable for the game. There's no official reporting on the injury outside of the report, but what I'm hearing is that he pulled a hamstring. He's considered 50-50 on Saturday. I think that alone is enough to say it's unlikely we'll see Romello Height in this game, as it makes more sense for him to be healthy in Utah in 2 weeks, which means likely we'll see Terrell Tillman and see what he can do in the outside linebacker position. Now, the good news is that Height is truly only expected to be out 1 week. He'll be back for Utah regardless. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the algorithm, supports the channel. I'll be back after the game for the official Flatland Sports postgame show live on X. I am Christopher Johnston. This is the Flatland Sports Podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you for bearing with me in the throat here, and wreck 'em.